G'day and welcome back to this episode, Season 2, Episode 6 of Indefensible New Zealand. I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie and today we're going to be talking about voluntary national service. Voluntary National Service, or VNS. The term has been used by me and others over the last several years, and so it's not unreasonable to ask, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And the answer to that is 3 points. Firstly, lack of social cohesion in New Zealand, which is becoming more apparent every day. Secondly, the imbalance in migration between outflows of those born here and inflows of those not. And the connection with that and social cohesion is clear. And finally, I think it's clear in the Western world that there has been a general failure or degradation of the all-volunteer workforce model across all sorts of sectors, and VNS is designed to help address that. I've been talking about some form of VNS for about 30 years. I think the time is right now. The subject is coming up more and more in the literature around the world, in political spheres, and it's time we had a decent conversation about it here in New Zealand, where compulsory anything really doesn't fly, but volunteerism is still strong. So what vision do I have for a New Zealand operating VNS? A New Zealand society bound together with a common thread of service to the country, no matter when or from where you came here. Shared stories that come from a program where the rich, the poor, the immigrant and tangata whenua all have had an uncommonly good experience together. And so the mission is to create a political action pathway, a multi-path voluntary scheme within which Kiwis can undertake full-time or part-time service to the country in exchange for certain benefits, and particularly the retirement of student loans. The scheme can be entered before, concurrently or after study for an approved trade or tertiary qualification. Now that's not the only limits that can be placed on VNS. It could be very, very broad, but for the purpose of the discussion, that's what I'm going to talk about today. How would VNS work? There could be 4 or 5 main service paths, which are described next. A common residential orientation course estimated at about 3 to 4 weeks at the point of entry and run regionally is a feature that I've included. A specialised internship period, designated mentors in the participants' service area, now duties and further personal development administered by the employer groups that the volunteers are assigned to, with completion of obligation tracked simply by tax code. The early bird scheme, which is potentially the 5th scheme, is to encourage teenagers who wish to commit early to voluntary national service through other schemes like cadets, scouts, surf lifesaving and the like. So how do the service paths work? Scheme 1, the service path is full-time study first. So you sign up for VNS and you're accepted when you first enrol to study. You go get your trade or your degree and complete your service either full-time or part-time after you graduate. Service path 2 is the opposite. It's full-time service first, and you sign up for VNS at the same time you enter full-time employment in your selected work stream. And once you complete your initial contract, you can go study for a trade or a degree without the need for a student loan. Path 3, full-time study and part-time service. This scheme has been run in differing forms by the New Zealand Defence Force over the years. Schemes such as Freiburg, Kippenberger and Malone, they were the names of schemes in the Army that coupled with service in full-time or the reserve force. And finally, full-time service and part-time study. And in this scheme, you're employed full-time, but you undertake extramural or other part-time study towards your approved qualification at the same time. And your study fees and the like are covered under the VNS scheme. Now, what sort of agencies could VNS volunteers work for? The New Zealand Defence Force, Navy, Army, Air Force. They've already have the Reserve Force, which is a part-time force, and have used some of the proposed models before. But like other agencies, though, they would need more capacity to take on VNS. New Zealand Police, there are huge opportunities in police, from general duties constables to specials, which are part-time officers, and non-sworn officers in a variety of roles ranging from forensics to IT. Emergency services. Many countries that operate national service models have a civil defence and emergency management option. This would be an appropriate VNS path, as would the fire service, ambulance, coast guard and surf lifesaving. The health sector. In the face of so many shortages, VNS offers significant opportunities in health, and we already have things like the rural GP bonding scheme as one example of such a system already in use. Likewise, in education, teachers, assistants, aides, specialists and administrators could all potentially be included in VNS. And the security agencies, fisheries, primary industries, biosecurity, customs, aviation security, these agencies and others could all employ VNS candidates and volunteers. So who can volunteer for national service? There are two elements to VNS. First is that the volunteer can cope with the demands of the work in the agency that they wish to apply for. The second is that they are acceptable to that agency. Now, a simple example of the latter is the security checks required for some jobs, which may not be required for others. Basically, every New Zealand citizen or permanent resident who's 18 years or older should be able to, in theory, apply for VNS. Their entry and placement will be subject to a range of criteria, like capacity of the program, their personal capabilities, and so on. The length of time in the scheme might vary widely from, say, a few weeks to several years of part-time service. I think the options should be kept broad. But in summary, if you're 18, you're a permanent resident or a citizen, you're studying or proposing to study an approved course on the scheme, and you're able to work in one of the available workplaces and acceptable to that workplace, then you should be able to be a candidate. How much might it cost? This is always the big question. As at 2023, the average entry level salary for a 20 to 24-year-old in New Zealand was in the range of $40,000 to $50,000 a year. A part-timer might be on 10% of that, say $5,000. It will vary. Second cost is the initial residential entry course. It's a one-off. And I've used the limited service volunteer scheme as a guide, and I estimate the operational cost of the entry course is probably around $10,000 per volunteer if the course is running at capacity. Clothing, personal equipment, travel and other admin costs are estimated at around $5,000. Trainers, supervisors and mentors in the workplace, both on the residential course and once volunteers are with their agencies, is likely to be around $3,000. And study and other course fees, not unlike what you could loan under the current student loan scheme, so it's about $10,000. So in year one, if you're up around sort of $58,000 to $60,000, you're not taking in large numbers. So 1,000, let's say it was $60,000, there's $1,000, so yeah, 60 million. Sounds like a big number until you actually go and look at the amount of money that's spent in social development, health, education, and wonder how much of that might be offset by directing people onto different paths. What are some other costs and potential downsides? First one is infrastructure. It's clear that new buildings or repurposed buildings will be needed for accommodation and training for the initial residential phases, and probably other facilities as well. Churn. We will need people administering this in the public sector, and the government will recover less student loan money because more people will be exempt from student fees. There is the potential for a scheme like this to become an industry or a pseudo-industry with greater costs than planned, and that needs to be carefully managed. Oversubscription. More people want to get into the scheme than can lead to disappointment. There are plenty of examples overseas where these schemes are extremely popular and entry is very competitive, particularly at some of the Norwegian example and some other Scandinavian countries. And I think it being competitive to get in is a good thing. but disappointment will have to be managed, that's for sure. And public service resistance. I think some public servants may resent having to train and mentor volunteers. They may resent the fact that the scheme didn't exist when they studied and they had to repay their student loan themselves. This will just have to be managed case by case and agency by agency. But to reiterate the benefits, social cohesion, there are few opportunities for people from all walks of life to rub shoulders together for a shared purpose. VNS provides that. We need to make New Zealand more attractive for young Kiwis. People tend to settle and stay with their first job and first love is. While OEs are great, we need to give young people more reasons to return or to stay here after they study. Purpose. Having a sense of purpose in life is essential for well-being, and VNS graduates will be able to talk with pride about how they helped to build the future New Zealand. Filling workforce gaps. New Zealand is critically short in almost every part of its workforce. VNS will provide a part of the solution and incentivise volunteers to consider working and living in the regions. And finally, bridging the qualification versus experience gap. Graduates and new tradespeople have knowledge and skills, but they lack experience, and VNS will help to bridge that gap. So let's talk about some other examples of these types of schemes. In the 2009 Defence White Paper process, the Associate Defence Minister, the Honourable Heather Roy, ran 3 companion studies, and these covered the NZDF's role in youth programs in the country. It looked at the defence industry in New Zealand, and it also looked at voluntary national service. So if you want a really good examination of the options and what's going on in the world, you can still download that VNS companion study from the New Zealand Ministry of Defence website. USA, AmeriCorps. In America, about 200,000 volunteers a year are taken into the AmeriCorps scheme. It's they serve their communities in a wide-ranging, voluntary, federally funded national service scheme across all sorts of sectors. I think it's great. NZDF has had, as I said, some schemes like this over the years, Freiburg, Kippenberger and Malone schemes. And the great shame was I think that they weren't continued, and they weren't well run in some cases, but they produced some extraordinarily capable people, particularly the Malone scheme. And finally, ROTC and national service. There's about 80 countries in the world that have some form of either compulsory or voluntary national service. Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, is in the USA and many other countries. It's a university or college-based scheme where you get help with your study in return for training in your spare time and taking certain subjects and the like, and you're commissioned at the end of it. Scandinavian national service models I've mentioned are highly sought after by candidates, an extremely powerful network as you go through your career of those that have been through that scheme. So what can you do if you support VNS? I hope you're as enthusiastic about the concept of voluntary national service as I am. If that's the case, here's a few ways you can help grow support for it. Talk to your friends and neighbours. By explaining the concept to others, you can build a wave of support. Ask them to discuss VNS on their social media feeds. Raise it with your local Member of Parliament, Mayor and District or City Councillors. Make them aware of the idea. Ask them to support it. Share these slides and audio links with them. And encourage your family members. Get family members, especially younger ones who have the most to gain from such a scheme being available. Get them excited about the possibilities of VNS for them and their friends, and get them to get the topic trending on social media. Remember, New Zealanders have never liked compulsory anything, but voluntary anything is well supported in New Zealand, and I think there's many people would jump at the chance to engage in a scheme like this. I've got a question for the podcast, because that's about it for VNS today. If you've got a question about VNS or anything else for the podcast on national security, you can go to the unclas.com website and go to the contacts page there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see on the screen there's a whole lot of other ways that you can contact me as well. So that's it. be careful out there. I've enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to having you back in the next episode shortly.